Our next speaker is Sister Elizabeth Delaney, and her topic is Many Names, Many Images, One God. Sister Elizabeth Delaney is General Secretary of the National Council of Churches in Australia. Elizabeth Delaney is a member of the Roman Catholic Church and has been a sister of the Good Samaritan for almost 50 years. She has been committed to ecumenism and interfaith relations for over 10 years, especially through her work with the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. In January 2015, she commenced her role as a General Secretary of the National Council of Churches in Australia. Please give a warm welcome to Sister Elizabeth Delaney.
You are widespread. Assalamu alaikum, shalom and peace. Peace be with all of you. And on the eve of the International Day of Peace, whose theme is the partnership for peace, dignity for all, what better thing could we be doing than gathered here? I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the clans of the Darrawal people, and give thanks for their care of the land and their passing on to generations the love and respect for the Spirit of God. I'd also very sincerely like to thank the organisers of this multicultural Eid Festival and Fair and for the invitation to speak. Dr. Ashfaq Ahmed and Mahar Ahmed, and also to Najir Khalil for chasing me up with emails. I hope the other speakers needed to get as many emails as I needed to make sure that I had everything done. So this morning, as a Christian, I and hope lots of other Christians attended church, where we celebrated Eucharist. I have to admit that during part of it I was distracted because I was taking part in it, and all of a sudden I thought, oh, I'm supposed to speak. I was distracted because I was looking at the floor, and the floor was made of a mosaic floor. And I thought, that's what we're like. That so many little pieces forming the most beautiful pattern, but they would only form the pattern because of their difference. Each piece by itself was rather insignificant, but together it made this wonderful, or the artist made a wonderful pattern. So fortunately I wasn't distracted by it for too long, and after there was a silence, I thought, oh, that's me. I'm supposed to stand up and do something. So, hopefully, yes. So, in thinking of also at church this morning, as is usual, we read the Gospel. The priest read the Gospel and I listened to it. And the Gospel was told of an incident in Jesus' life where he sat down. He had been with the crowds, and he left the crowds and came with the apostles and took them aside and, at home, it said, and they were arguing amongst themselves. And he asked them what were they arguing about. And they, perhaps like naughty children, or perhaps people feeling a bit guilty, didn't answer. And of course, they were arguing about who was the greatest. And Jesus said to them, he brought a child to himself. Now I have to admit, seeing the little children, especially that little girl walking around here today, that's what it's about. Jesus brought a child to him, put his arm around him and said, let me get the lines right, Anyone who welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. So my thoughts are on children. Now, children hold hope. We place, especially, when you have as much grey or white hair as I have, you want to, your hope rests in young people. And not just the very young, but it's lovely to see youngish adolescents and younger adults here today. And often I think to myself, what is my hope for them? And my hope, of course, is that they will know God and know God's love for them, and in turn love God. So it was interesting to then reflect on how we might come to know God, and to reflect on my own journey of how I've come to know God, and then to know what we know about God. And of course, we know God by the mystery of creation. I'm sure every parent has had a little child come up to them and show them a leaf or an insect, or a little grandnephew who called me recently and said, "Come and look." I had to follow this 2-year-old, and he showed me ants. And it's just that mystery and the wonder that creation is able to speak to them, and although they don't have the words of God, in time, hopefully it will be that they will recognise in creation, not only in the little insects, but in the beauty, magnificence, variety, intricacies, the wonder of creation, and the wisdom and beauty of God. We also come to know God, of course, through our church, through our core, through our faith community. For me, it's through church, or Christians through our church. And particularly when we come together to pray and to celebrate rituals. Now, when Christians come together, they will always, especially on a Sunday, when they come together, they will hear the Word of God in the Scriptures, and then they will celebrate Eucharist. Why celebrate the Eucharist? It's a ritual that is also called the breaking of the bread. From the early days, it was called the breaking of the bread, but done in memory of Jesus. Now, Christians, as I was introduced, I'm representing in a way 19 different churches, different Christian churches, and they will have slight variations on how they do it, fairly significant variations on how they do it, but some variations also on what they understand by that too. But certainly done in memory of Jesus. One of the ways we come to learn about God also is by images. I mentioned a church having a mosaic floor. Well, it's not an image of God, unless one read something into it. But around many Christian churches there will be stained glass windows, or in some there will be icons. I suppose icons are a gift from our Eastern churches, and churches in the West have recognised them and often have them as a sacred place in their churches. And it's not that those images, particularly the stained glass windows, my understanding is that these were put into cathedrals and churches because people couldn't read. It was a way of teaching them what is contained in the Scriptures. So if you couldn't read the word for yourself, yes, you would hear it, but perhaps even And you may not even be able to hear it if it wasn't spoken in a language that you understood. So the image, a picture, was allowing them to reflect on what was being read. And icons, of course. Now I should have talked about this a little bit more to Barbara Shanouda, who's coming after me, but I have done a little bit of reading on icons, and they're meant not to just present an image. It's the mystery contained in it that one's meant not just to look at it and walk away, but to reflect on the mystery of it contained in the icon. We come to God, of course, through the scriptures. And I named this talk before I wrote it, by the way, so it's wandering a little bit from quite the title, but Images of God. Because in the scriptures, we have so many images of God. God as creator, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God who is always faithful to his people, God who is our strength, our rock, God who is lover, God who lifts up a child. I love that passage that speaks of that God says, I taught Ephraim to walk. I took them in my arms. Yet they have not understood that I was the one looking after them. I led them with reins of kindness, with leading strings of love. I was like someone who lifts an infant close against his cheek. Stooping down to him, I gave him his food. The images, any parent, I think, could identify immediately with that image. And I, of course, think about so many little toddlers. God who guides his people like a shepherd. So all of these are images of the God as present in the Old Testament. Jesus then, in the New Testament, fulfills these. Those same images apply to him, but he continues. So Jesus speaks himself. He calls himself the bread of life, light of the world, the way, the truth, and the life. He is presented as Son of God and Word of God. Perhaps one of the most popular images of Jesus is as the Good Shepherd, the one who carries the sheep, who looks for the lost sheep. But it's not only what Jesus says of himself, but what he does that speaks to us. So Jesus taught, he talked and touched many people. And I'd just like to reflect for a couple of minutes on 3 or 4 people. One is a Samaritan woman. The Gospel of John presents Jesus coming to a well and sitting down, and a woman comes to that well, and Jesus spoke to the woman. And the woman's first reaction is, "Why are you talking to me? I'm a woman, a Samaritan woman." I won't go into the whole story because I could talk for 15 minutes on that. It's just saying something about Jesus. Yes, he knew that was not appropriate. But he spoke to that woman. Oh, thank you. I'll be quick. I'm not going to talk about so many people. Zacchaeus, who was a tax collector, and Jesus said, "I'll come and eat with you." Went to his house. One of his followers was Peter. Peter was to deny Jesus. Some would say Jesus wasn't very good at choosing a great team between Peter and Judas. One of the things that I want to speak about, and now I only have a minute and a half, is when somebody came to Jesus and said, "What's the greatest commandment?" He said, "To love God and love your neighbour." Who is my neighbour? And Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, I was introduced as a sister of the Good Samaritan, and so that story is very, very important to me. But what was it that was important? The person who was a Samaritan looked after somebody who had been bruised and battered, let me say that, robbed and left for dead. And he took him, cleaned him up a bit, put him on his donkey, took him to an inn, and he gave the innkeeper money and said, "If I haven't given you enough, I'll come back tomorrow and give you some more." And as Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." Now, as I said, I'm a sister of the Good Samaritan. I've been trying to be a sister of the Good Samaritan for 50 years, almost, not quite. And it's that story of Jesus is a constant challenge. Every time I walk past somebody on the street that says, "I don't especially want to stop and talk to that person," or I want to ignore that person, the parable of the Good Samaritan comes to me. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, each of our faiths have that concept of loving our neighbour. If we could live that, I think we would do very well. I think, as Jeremy says, it's about recognising the angel in every person, recognising God in every person. And so my prayer is that the God of all love and all grace will enable us to go and recognise Him, recognise God in others, and be neighbour to each one.
Thank you, Sister Elizabeth Delaney. Yes, you have talked about God's attributes, and God as love, God as shepherd, and Jesus also being a shepherd for the humankind, for the mankind. As we have, like, God is as known as in Islamic faith known as Allah, and we have also for Allah 99 attributes for Him. Now I would like to call upon